I will tell you that was one of the reasons why people like Tom Homan asked me to come back to bring my Chief Clem sledgehammer to come bust open these problems. And I will tell you with great confidence that we fixed all of this on the front end now. So we do require fingerprints for all adults in the household. We do have DNA testing in place for those that are claiming family relationships. Basically, all the requirements that we do for any other job application or requirement in the United States, we require you fill this out. We are doing the proper vetting. When we send contract field specialists to go do a setting to make sure this is a proper placement environment, we're following up with that and taking that field specialist opinion and review at heart. We pump the brakes, so you cannot just send a Photoshop driver's license and a glamour shot of you and this child and say, look, this is the relationship. Those were the type of documents that were being accepted.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'd love to have you with us. You don't get charged a thing. Just hit subscribe. All right. Immigration. What a word that has become in our society. It's thrown around in ways that are erroneous. Immigrants versus illegal immigrants are conflated into one issue. That's not legit. That's not factual. So who do we want living here in our country? We do have borders. And I think a big part of the reason that Trump is in office is because we wanted those borders to be safe and secure. One of the first people brought into the Trump administration was Chris T. Clem, former chief patrol agent of the U.S. Border Patrol in Yuma. And he was tasked with relocating all these lost, unaccompanied minors, toddlers, children, people under the age of 18 who came into this country and then kind of disappeared. He's going to tell us how that happened, why that happened, what's been done, and some astonishing details about just how fraudulent all of this was. He is our guest next. Stick around. Chief Clem, it's great to see you. It's not so great to read a headline like this. I was just kind of perusing there's a the website for cbp.gov. You can go there and see what the news is. And I see this from kind of late September. 2 illegal aliens charged after choking Border Patrol agent in Houston. And I thought to myself, I never heard this story. And I had to go to the CBP website to find it. It's just another example of what these agents deal with. What is it like on the border day in, day out?
Those examples, right, happen all the time across the border. It just doesn't get the headlines until recently, right? Under this administration where we've kind of started, getting the truth out there. I will say this, that talking to my friends as early as just recent as yesterday on the border, that things are so much better, right? That they don't have the millions of people coming in. They're able to go out there and be the true security force that they were trained and the American people expect them to. So we are now outnumbering the bad guys. And so we're in a much better position, especially on the border. Now, I will say this, the old traditional ways of smuggling are now back into the primary methods of smuggling, meaning, up in the high country, up in the mountains, armed escorts, things like that, because they know they can't just walk in our border and be caught and released like we did in the previous administration. But what you're talking about, especially in that article, is Border Patrol and other immigration enforcement resources around the country engaging in these arrest operations of criminal and targeted public safety threats. And you're seeing this type of action, which was typically unheard of. But somehow, and I think the media and a lot of our progressive Democratic elected officials are stoking that flame to give people this false sense of empowerment that they can assault a federal agent and think they're going to get away with it. So that's not going to happen. You're not going to get away with it. You may attempt to assault us, but boy, I've seen some recent video, and our Border Patrol agents, our ICE officers, are responding right away.
Well, before we keep going on to that, it's something you said jumped out at me, the old traditional ways of smuggling. It makes me believe that it's never going to stop, that we're never going to completely be able to keep whatever's being smuggled in from being smuggled in. How do you deal with those mountainous areas and that old traditional way of smuggling?
Well, a part of it is we get the infrastructure, the personnel, the technology, and the access roads that we have longed for decades. That the Trump administration under Trump 45 began, and we all know, and we don't have to rehash too much of it, how much of that was just stopped on day one under the Biden administration, which was only resurfaced and reinvigorated under the current president, Trump 47, with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So when you can put the resources, the required resources that the men and women of the Border Patrol have asked for in the right places, you start reducing those areas where the traditional operations, had been exploited. Again, there's evil out there, and there's always going to be this desire to move people and things. The transnational criminal organizations, they are commodity neutral. I mean, they're going to push whatever they can profit on. And so when we have a drug problem here in the United States, if we are still dealing with trafficking issues regarding labor and sex trafficking, they're going to find ways. And so the more we continue to put the resources at our front line, we use the resources of I got to say, very impressed and love Secretary Rubio with the Secretary of State going out there and holding these source countries accountable. That's how we start taking those incremental steps to shut things down. And have good faith and trust that our men and women in the Border Patrol especially are going to go out there and chase those people down, because that's what they're trained to do. And so we've seen those numbers drop, but that threat is going to be there. As long as there's a threat against the United States, we're always going to have the need for that border security apparatus to be at full tilt all the time.
I know one of the things that you've been involved in is child trafficking and trying to find these hundreds of thousands of missing children that came across let's just say it, during the Biden administration. How successful has that been so far? What's the update on the fate of these children?
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was asked to do, and I was honored to do, to be asked to come up and work on the first 100 days of the current Trump administration, specifically with Health and Human Services, who are responsible under the Office of Refugee Resettlement to take all the unaccompanied alien children who are apprehended at the border. Now, we know that there was close to 479,000 unaccompanied children that came in under the Biden administration. Now, a good majority of them, probably 60%, were adolescents, 15, 16, 17 years old. But that means that remaining 30, 40% were younger, and to include tender age. So through all the numbers that have been thrown out there, there was originally 300,000 that were unaccounted for. The paperwork wasn't there because there was practices and policies in place that basically turned them into ghosts. Every case became a cold case for ICE, which is, again, they're getting a bad rap for doing their job, but they're doing an amazing job. It's their responsibility to track down these children, to get them in front of the court, to do the due process, to protect them. Now, one of the things that we had to do is really narrow down that search to what is the active, where are the kids that we can't account for. And those numbers were around 120 to 130,000. We had no idea where they were. The paper trail hadn't caught up with them. They hadn't aged out of the system. They hadn't been removed. There was about 120 to 130,000. I can tell you that as of about 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was about 25,000 of those that have been recovered, accounted for, back into safe custody, going through their process. Over 400 of the sponsors who have gone after these children to sponsor them fraudulently and illegally have been charged with criminal charges ranging from fraud and abuse. And then, unfortunately, there's at least 27, and that was a public number, 27 that were determined they had been deceased, had lost their lives somewhere in this process. That is just the very tip of the iceberg, because that still leaves another 100,000 plus children that we've got to figure out where they are. And just to kind of it's always that $64,000 question. How? How did this happen? the President Biden suspended the issuing of the immigration charging documents to 100 days after they were placed in sponsorship, which makes no sense. So when the sponsor,
So why do you think he did that? If it makes no sense, why did he do that?
I can't make heads or tails of it other than this idea that they are doing good by putting kids into the back to their families or reuniting, because there's this facade that they're all here for the right reasons, and we can't make any heads or tails of it. That's the very troubling part, because it doesn't make any sense to any reasonable or prudent person. Because if we're about protecting the kids, you want to make sure you do everything right and by the book. But by not charging them, and when we have 70% of the sponsorship applications have fraud in them, do you think the information we're going to get is accurate 100 days later when we go to send a notice to appear or go knock on an address and realize it's an empty lot in Austin, Texas? Or it's just so these are the things.
Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about when you say, when you catch up and you've been given an address, for example, where a kid is,
Yep.
and you show up and there's nothing there?
That's literally what happens in many of these cases. Or we go there and we find 25 kids there that have been sponsored there and the paperwork's not there. It was.
And who are these sponsors? Are the sponsors American citizens, or are they also people here illegally?
Most of them are going to be non-citizens, whether here illegally or on visas. There are some citizenship sponsors. And I guess I should break it down that there's really 4 categories that we look at from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. One is obviously the best would be the parent or legal guardian. The second sponsor is an adult relative. The third would be an unrelated adult. That would be like if you and I wanted to sponsor a child. And then the fourth is an Office of Refugee Resettlement foster care setup. So when these family members, especially these category 1 or 2, sponsor, I mean, that's where the fraud begins, because so many of them are here illegally or in violation of their immigration status, and they don't give the right information. They're using fraud documents, bad addresses, just terribly photoshopped documents. They ended biometric DNA testing for family units under the last administration, minimized or almost eliminated fingerprints. If you claim to be a sponsor of a child, shouldn't we at least check your criminal background and make sure that you're not a known sex trafficker or offender or abuser? These are the things that just make common sense that we're just thrown out the door.
Yes. It's amazing. We adopted our daughter from Bogota, Colombia, and the hoops that we had to jump through, and the number of times our fingerprints were taken, and the number of documents that had to be processed in ways that I didn't even know existed before we went through this. It was worth every iota of the effort. Every single day of waiting, it was worth it. Our daughter is our joy. But why that? We're talking about children here.
Yeah.
And bringing them here and then just sort of letting them kind of go poof into the wind, and you're not sure where they're going or if these people are even related to them.
Right.
That's just unbelievable
it
to
is.
me.
And it's atrocious that our government was responsible for this.
Yeah.
I will tell you that was one of the reasons why people like Tom Homan asked me to come back to bring my Chief Clem sledgehammer to come bust open these problems. And I will tell you with great confidence that we fixed all of this on the front end now. So we do require fingerprints for all adults in the household. We do have DNA testing in place for those that are claiming family relationships. Basically, all the requirements that we do for any other job application or requirement in the United States, we require you fill this out. We are doing the proper vetting. When we send contract field specialists to go do a setting to make sure this is a proper placement environment, we're following up with that and taking that field specialist opinion and review at heart. And so we have seen, and in fact, I recently testified in the Senate a couple weeks ago, where the Senator Padilla from the minority side said the length of stay, the length of time these children are in government custody has extended beyond 60-day average to almost 6 months. And I'm like, you know what? Because he wouldn't ask me. That's because we're holding these people accountable, and the criminal side can no longer vet or no longer apply and sponsor these kids because we're doing the right thing. We pump the brakes. So you cannot just send a Photoshop driver's license and a glamour shot of you and this child and say, look, this is the relationship. Those are the type of documents that were being accepted. So I don't care if they stay in our custody for a year. If that means we're going to finally put them in a safe place with an adult that has been vetted and no longer a criminal. Last thing I'll say on that, and I don't ever want to dehumanize, but my wife and I, we adopted a rescue pit bull. And again, I don't want to dehumanize anybody, but we had to provide proof of residency, proof of income, and a copy of our driver's license to get a dog that was about to be euthanized. Yeah. The background checks that they required to get an animal are less than some of the things that they were doing to sponsor a child who has been.
How many of these children end up going back to their countries of origin, or do they? Are they just absorbed?
Well, it's kind of very interesting. We do look at everything from a case by case situation. Something that made the headlines as recent as Labor Day weekend. There was over 300 or close to 400 kids from Guatemala. That the country of Guatemala has been a really good ally in this with us. Had said, look, we've identified family members. We want our children back where they're sitting in ORR custody. We'll take full responsibility for our citizens, and we'll reunite them with the family members that are here. And then the NGOs, who we know have been profiting a lot out of this, are the ones that put up the lawsuits and the last minute injunctions and found a sympathetic judge that halted that removal. Could you imagine if we had 300 American children in a country and our president agreed, hey, we're going to go take our children back, and the other country said, no, we know what's best. That's what the United States did. The government of Guatemala refused, the U.S. Courts refused to allow these children to go home to their family and to their country. So when you say, are they reunited? Yes, we make every attempt to reunify them back in their homeland with their family. Unfortunately, some of them, don't have family anymore, so we just have to absorb them into our system. Right. And again, we don't want to put them back into an environment that they fled if they truly fled. That's the other key, Michelle. Some of them are being trafficked and smuggled, and they don't have any independent decision making in this, and they're better off being back where they belong, which could be with their family back in their home country.
Now, I know you were never an ICE agent, correct? You were CBP. But what we see now, speaking of dehumanization, using that word, ICE agents are being totally dehumanized and blamed for a lot of stuff. I don't know if you saw this recently. It drew a lot of social media attention. There were it was in New York, I believe, and there were these ICE agents getting on an elevator. They were being followed by the press, and the accusation. Did you see that video?
There's been so many of them. Is this the one where they...
where the photographer gets knocked down?
Yeah. Where he's saying that he was, immobilized or couldn't move.
Yes. Do we know what the real story is there? I don't. Yeah. So I don't know if you do either.
I don't know the background of it. I can tell you what is typical. Well, let me go back a little bit, and I know you support this, but part of the immigration enforcement continuum, what is the law, is after someone is apprehended at the border, if they can't be immediately returned back to like Canada or Mexico, they have to go into an immigration proceeding which is controlled by ICE. And that is part of the due process that everybody on the left is screaming about. The first part of due process is the arrest and the charge and then going through the courts. And so everything that the ICE agents are doing across our interior is to make sure that people are meeting their immigration requirements from the enforcement perspective. And by the way, 70% of the nearly 130,000 interior arrests so far have already had criminal histories or in the United States, and 30% have, I may have got that reversed. I think it's 70% already have orders of removal. They failed to depart the country. And the remaining 30% have active criminal histories in the United States. So they are targeting those. So the media gets spun up on this because they say, oh, they just arrested a grandmother who has been selling tamales. Well, they don't tell you the story is that grandma is a 2-time prior felon who is a matriarch of a smuggling organization who's eluded arrest. So that's when the frenzy comes, and then you have these photographers and journalists, chasing ICE around everywhere. And look, whether it's innocent or not, you cannot put your hands on a law enforcement officer. And when you're getting in the way of their operations, you're going to be taken care of. And I don't like to see it, but you know what? Don't get in the way of a law enforcement officer when they're conducting their duties. And that's what we're seeing play out across the country. And it's sad that that's what it's gotten to.
Yeah, I'm with Greg Gutfeld on this, that you should call it the National Immigration Customs Enforcement. So the word is nice instead of ICE, and then people can't villainize it as much. But we had the episode down in Dallas, which was so tragic, where a couple of these immigrants lost their lives because someone was shooting at ICE,
Right.
and we know that they were peppering the building, the ICE facility. They peppered the van, which is how the two were. 3 of them were injured, 2 deceased. One, I think, is still hospitalized as we record this. But the rhetoric. I know that word gets thrown around a lot. Tone down the rhetoric. But it, to me, is so irresponsible for people like Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker and so many on the left to call these guys Gestapo. Tim Walz, here where I live in Minnesota, Gestapo, and or Jasmine Crockett calling, these remind me of the slave patrols. This is, I don't know why we tolerate this from politicians. They're entitled to say whatever they want, but I don't like our quote unquote leaders speaking in this way. And it seems to have, I like to say people are responsible for their own actions, and this shooter was responsible for his own actions. But if you keep repeating the lie and it becomes their reality, particularly if they've got a mental issue, you end up with situations like this. How do we, is there any hope, Clem? Because I don't see any of this being toned down in the near future.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I've done my best, both through my career and then in and out of retirement, I guess, to try to be as objective and optimistic as I can and choose my words. But I think it's time to take the gloves off and just call it what it is. These really progressive left Democratic, they're not leaders, but they're in elected positions. The Newsom, the Waltz, the Pritzkers, and some of these mayors, they really are shouldering the blame for this violence that we're seeing in these protests that are turning into riots across our country because they're this inflammatory language. You're exactly right. First of all, none of them experienced what the SS Nazi Gestapo were doing to people back, in the 40s and earlier than that, right? That's horrible. They weren't around, or they were very young when really civil rights abuses were happening here in the United States. So when Jasmine Crockett is calling them slave patrol, she has no idea. We only learned it because we study our history. But when you have, like you mentioned, it's the key, the mentally unstable people that are buying into this language and feeling like they need to be part of something, and when you constantly repeat that lie that it becomes the truth of that group of political bloc, if you will, you see this. This is the 3rd shooting, I think, since mid-spring or early summer in Texas. Twice at an ICE facility, once at a Border Patrol station. It doesn't end well for these shooters. The fact that we had coming off a horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, that should be enough to say, all right, we can speak about our opposition, but we cannot use inflammatory language and encourage people using terms to mentally unstable people saying fight back against the fascists is going to trigger something. And it's sad, but the fact that Dallas shooter was just firing indiscriminately into an ICE building that killed 2 of the people that he was at least claiming or believed to be fighting for is, is just complete, just tragic. But, is it preventable? I don't know if it's like they're dug in so deep on this anti-ICE movement, and really it's because
they
they
just
hate the
keep
president.
doubling down.
You know,
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if
that's
we're going to
generally
change
what
that.
it always comes
we
back
may have to endure this for
Yeah.
a couple more years. I will say this: I'm optimistic if we can have a successful midterm campaign and keep control of the House and Senate. They're going to realize, all right, I don't think they'll join us, but maybe they won't fight us as hard and allow some of this to play out and protect our law enforcement, who is just trying to make America safe.
And they're just doing their jobs that they've been asked to do. I saw an interview with the young agent down there in Dallas who helped save some of these people out of the van. What's interesting to me, and I know this because my family is Hispanic, and many of them live in the Southwest, and you have so many of these agents who are of Latino backgrounds. And, this gentleman, Andre was his name, was talking about how he just was doing his duty and he was just following his training, and he went in there and saved a bunch of people. So these guys are just trying to do their job. You before I let you go, you were working for the first 100 days with RFK Jr. and HHS and doing this. What now? Because that sort of assignment ends, and then what happens?
Well, I got to follow up on something you mentioned, because it's so important to the previous part of our conversation. Border Patrol is majority Hispanic agents. They took the oath of office just like any of us did to protect this country, and so that just kind of, I think that just gets under the skin of some of the progressive Hispanic leaders on the Democratic Party, is that you have a majority of minorities in that agency. And it's just crazy, because we see this as red, white, and blue, not independent, not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans to protect our country. I had a great run. I didn't want a second career in the government. I'd already done 27 plus years before, so I felt like I was very fortunate to be back with the administration for the first 100 days. I am now back with one of the groups I've worked with, Americans for Prosperity. It's one of the largest grassroots organizations. I did spend the last 18 months before I came back to government around the country. We worked on policies affecting border security and immigration, targeting a lot of the vulnerable political positions where we've got several wins. We've got the senator in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Montana, to help the conservative movement. So I'm speaking on that, bringing the border to the people. I've already been to Iowa and Indiana and Utah, and I've got a couple more trips lined up to Pennsylvania just here in the next few weeks. So I'm going to be out there bringing facts, not hyperbole, bringing the border to the people, and that's a good thing for me. And of course, I've got a few other things in the hopper regarding advising and consulting with certain industry leaders. So it's keeping me busy, and I've dabbled in a few different. Did a film where I was an extra and did some acting. Somebody saw me on a podcast and on a news segment and said, "Hey, could you be a ring announcer for us?" I said, "Let's give it a try." So we'll see where all that plays out. It's not where I ever imagined I'd be, but I'm
jack of all trades.
Try to, right? A master of none. But I really like to. I like speaking about the facts. I live in a border state. It was my career. I'm not. It's not. I still got a lot of fight in me. I'm just not signing up to go back to government again, at least at this time. I guess never say never. But bringing the truth to the people is the most important things, and trying to close.
But the office that you worked for is still active and alive in HHS.
Yes, in fact, I handpicked my replacement. I think that he is doing a wonderful job. He's a former immigration enforcement leader, so I'm going to keep his name quiet. But and then the people that we picked to run the agencies right now are just doing an amazing job. So, when you have transformation and transition in any kind of agency, especially something as that runs on all cylinders like a Trump administration, you've got to take things in phases. So bring in somebody like me that's going to really kind of bust things up and kind of start molding it together. and then now we bring in the people with the scalpels that kind of start fine tuning these things as we move forward. And I think that was the plan from day one. I agree to, and so I'll leave you and the audience with the confidence that the men and women that are up there in Washington running these programs are top notch, that they are going to leave no stone unturned. They're going to do everything they can to find these kids and protect these kids, and we put practices and policies in place so we never, as a country, have to go through what we are going through right now, cleaning up a mess that was created when all we should be doing is looking in the best interest of protecting children. That's not
a mess that was created, and very little media covered it, and the ones who did were right, and the truth is coming out. It's great to see you. Great to talk to you. We'll do it again.
Yes, ma'am.
And I always end the podcast by saying, be brave and do good. And certainly the people that are of your ilk, like you, are just courage and doing the right thing. And we appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
We'll see you next time, everyone. You can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.